Today's species spotlight is on a species of python that gets forgotten all the time, including by me. It's a really underrated species, and actually we're going to be talking about two different ones today, and that is the children's pythons and the spotted pythons. Now, a couple people asked me to talk about this for a while now, but I was waiting to actually get a little bit more hands-on experience as well as get some good video, and so that's what we have today. So, in fact, I do have a spotted python with us here. I highlighted him in the recent-ish video of me bringing in some animals, as well as we went and visited our friends Braden Exotics again, and we got some more B-roll from some of their really cool species. So, children's and spotted pythons. As I said before, very underrated, often forgotten even by me. These guys come from, parts of Australia, a little bit of New Guinea and Indonesia, and some of the surrounding islands. Now, these guys, just like a lot of North American rat snakes and colubrids, have gone through some really weird taxonomy changes, and we're going to get into that a little bit before we get into the rest of them. So these guys are part of a group of snakes. The genus is called Antaresia. So Antaresia are sometimes called the stellar pythons, and that's because they are named after the star Antares, or Antares, I'm always going to mess that up, which is part of the Scorpius constellation. So for all you zodiac people out there, that's the constellation Scorpius, and then one of the stars that makes it up is Antares. That's what these guys were named after. Now, Antaresia is a fairly recent changed and established genus. In fact, some of them were even called liasses for a while, considering how their head shape looks very similar to like the maclots and the olive pythons, but they are now their own one. So in Antaresia, there's actually 4 different species currently recognized. The children's, the spotted, the anthill or pygmy, which is the title holder for the world's smallest species of python, and the Papuan spotted. Now, there's another one that you're probably thinking about, the Stimson's python. But fairly recently, the Stimson's python was categorized as being part of the species of spotted python. There's plenty of arguments as to why they should or shouldn't be part of that. We're not going to get into that. But as of right now, it is considered in the taxonomy biologist, herpetologist world that the Stimson's pythons are more of like a locale. I don't even think they're fully even recognized as a subspecies of the children's pythons. Now, the spotted pythons get their name for a pretty obvious reason. They're spotted. The children's python, while a lot of people think that they might be named for how of a fairly easy to take care of snake that they are, that even children can handle them, and while that is true for a lot of cases, they're actually in fact named for a British professor who worked at the museum in London during the time of their classification back in the 1800s. Now, with that being said, I did say that they can be pretty good as far as pets go. And while you're wondering, hey, how come you don't have one on display if you have one, JZ? Well, that's for 2 reasons. Number 1 is the fact that I got him as an adult. He is very prey motivated and will bite me even while holding a mouse in his face, where literally I will feed him a frozen thaw mouse, he'll grab it, and then proceed to try to bite me with that mouse in his face. And he's also in shed right now. So that's a twofer. That's why we don't have him out with me right now. So that's all that fun little taxonomy stuff out of the way. Let's get back to actually talking about these guys. So spotteds and children's pythons, really, really cool species. They're found in Australia, as I said before, in some of the regional parts of there. The spotteds are typically found, historically anyway, on the northeastern coast of Australia. So when you look at the little coast over here, that's the Gold Coast. That's where Sydney is, over there on the west coast. Over here on the east, that's where they are typically found, from the very top northern part and some of the surrounding islands down about halfway down the continent. These children's pythons historically occupied kind of the northern part, mostly making up the top parts of Queensland and the Northern Territory. Although now that we've now included the Stimson's pythons into the whole spotted pythons, that whole range, in fact, despite the fact that Stimson's had the widest range and the most varied habitat that they have been found in, they are now included with children. So now they have a huge, wide-reaching part of basically all of Australia, with the exceptions of like the furthest southeast parts of Australia. And because of that, these guys are found in a very wide-ranging, varied amount of habitats, from rocky, arid parts, both the spotteds and the children's, to, hilly, sandy grasslands, to farmlands, to not as much in human habitation, but they certainly are found in there, although maybe not quite as much as like a brown snake or something like that. And they're also found even parts of the rainforest, parts of Australia as well. So that means they're very adaptable, very hardy snakes that are found kind of all over the place. So when we look at these guys, obviously being Antaresia, being part of like the pygmy, although that's the anthill python, the smallest genus of pythons, that's what they're pretty famous for, right? Well, when we actually look at them, so when we break up the two, because we're mostly talking about the children's and the spotteds are actually averaging the largest of them, with some of them sometimes reaching up to 4 feet long, which is about the size of like a large male ball python. Large-ish male ball python. I have some that are almost 4.5, 5 feet long too. But they're significantly smaller. They're a much more slender body animal. And then the children's python typically average a little bit less, usually around 3-ish feet long. But they all have a few pretty distinct characteristics that distinguish them from other species of python. So when you look at them, they obviously do have that kind of triangular head that many species have. They also have those labial pits like most, other than, the womas and the blackheads, because I don't know why we call them pythons, species of pythons that they have as well. But they have pretty prominent eyes. They're usually very kind of like this orange gold color, and that can vary with the individual. And then they have usually a pretty thin, narrow neck, and then a very slender body, which makes them almost more like a house snake or garter snake in like basic body size and appearance than versus like a ball python or even some of the other different species of smaller pythons out there. Really, 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 really cool. So when we look at them, a lot of people really like the children's more. They have a tendency to be a little bit more lighter, a little bit more varied in color, with a little bit more orange and reds. But typically it's kind of a, sandy brown, reddish brown background, and then a yellowish underbelly. The spotted pythons typically are darker, with those, and it varies with the individual, from some being larger and less blotches to smaller and a whole bunch of those dark blotch spots to more of a regular kind of dark, almost chocolatey brown sometimes, but it can vary, and then that yellowish underbelly as well. I personally like the spotted pythons as far as coloration goes than the children's. Their temperament and care is very, very similar. So these guys have actually been in the hobby here in the United States for a very, very long time. They just haven't been really as popular as a lot of the other ones because they don't really have the morphs. And let's be honest, when it comes to herpetoculture and the reptile keeping hobby as a whole, at least here in this country, it's all about the morphs. Although we are starting to see a little bit more of a shift very slowly, but I don't think those morphs are going away anytime soon. As far as I am aware, because it did take me quite a bit to go into research about the different morphs that I could find, at least here, it seems like only the spotted pythons really have any distinguishing morphs. There is what appears to be the more traditionally classified Stimson's locality, or Stimson's pythons, versus the children's, that sometimes there's a little bit of a phenotypical difference, but it seems like the only morphs that we really have here are the spotted pythons, being both a striped and a granite, which looks really cool. But in Australia, where they have them all the time and they're kept very commonly, there are a ton of them, including, I believe, patternless, T-positive, T-negative, pied, melanistic, bunch of really cool stuff that they have in Australia that we don't really get here, because like all Australian species, basically what we have is what we got. What was exported either legally before it was done or through grayish ways, as we've talked about in other videos, were shipped either to Europe or to here. And that's it. There's no more exportation of any of those species of any kind, be it a bearded dragon, a carpet python, the Australian green tree pythons that we're never going to have here, or any of these really, really cool, very underrated species of Antaresia python. We do have, as far as I know, we don't have the Papuan spotted, but we do have the pygmy or anthill, the spotted, and the children's here in the United States. Now, some of the Australian viewers here would absolutely love to hear and chip in your 2 cents. I mostly am really only going off of a couple of different Australian papers and Australian YouTubers out there, how they keep them. But as far as care goes in captivity, it's fairly simple and fairly straightforward. Being a smaller animal, they don't necessarily have to have as large of an enclosure. Although, as we previously said, that the spotted python can sometimes be up to 4 feet long, so we're still looking at a fairly long enclosure. Give them plenty of height because they will climb and they'll absolutely take use of that. And then, as we said before, with their range being so wide and distributed and being found in all these different habitats, that usually makes them a very hardy, very sturdy, easy to care for animal that can take a lot of different habitats and temps and humidities. And in fact, when you look at all of their different care sheets that you can find on the internet, it's like anywhere between 30 and 90 is the percentage of humidity. I'm like, wait, what? So basically that means is that they can be found in these lower humidity areas, but they also do occupy those microhabitats and hides and shelters with much higher humidity. And so that's what we usually try to recreate in herpetoculture and keeping them as pets, is that's what we'll try to give them. So we'll give them their enclosure, we'll give them a basking spot, maybe like a rock or a little ledge for them to bask under with a decent basking spot somewhere in the 90s, but always remember to give them a proper thermal gradient. So even if it's a smaller enclosure, make sure that they have the ability to get away from that heat, and then give them a couple different hides and things that they can get under, and make sure you give them the ability to have a humid hide, which allows them to shed and to get away when they want to get more humidity than versus the dry areas. That's basically about it when it comes to them. Supposedly they can be kept in pairs and in trios and in small groups. I haven't seen too many examples of that, but it seemed to be a fairly consistent thing with everything that I read up on, that they can be kept in groups. Although, however, when we're ever talking about cohabitating animals of the same species, of the same sex, or whatever, always make sure that you need to provide extra room for them to bask, to hide, to shelter, and get away from each other if they so choose. Pretty easy to care for animals. They are beginner to intermediate, if we want to use those terms, as far as care goes and handling. My guy, we got him as adult, not really socialized at all, very reactive, very striky. So we're working on that. He now doesn't fly out of the tub every time that I go in there. Now it's only when I've ever put anything near his face. So progress. But as a whole, when you get them younger and you work with them very consistently, they do have a tendency to be very placid, very amicable animals, just like ball pythons can be. And in fact, when we look at them, they seem to be very alert, very curious, very intelligent animals, as a lot of species of snake are, but they do seem to be very aware and very curious and very intent on their movements and what they do as they move around. Again, here in the United States, we don't really have quite as many morphs, but honestly, I like them. They just look kind of really cool. I like the normal, wild type look of many species of animals, including even ball pythons. Really, really cool species of snake. Sorry that it took so long for me to actually get to do this. I know a couple of people asked, probably close to a year ago at this point, so sorry it took so long and we're backed up a little bit, but hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. I always have really fun doing these ones, doing these deep dives into these different species that are really cool, underrepresented, often forgotten, Jay-Z, species of reptiles, mostly snakes, but I'm starting to reach out to more people to do the other different types of reptiles, be it monitors or even some crocodilians I have some stuff down the pipeline working on that. So again, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you want to click on the species spotlight, every single video, I always do it. Playlist, if you want to check that out, there's over 50 different species now in there, from turtles to lizards to all sorts of different snakes, obviously. If you want to go check that out, helps my click-through rate, please hit that bell notification, like and subscribe if you can. If you want to see any other species, I don't forget them. I write them down in my little notebook here. So that way I always get my stuff as fairly straightforward as I can, and I always have the notes on there with me as well. If you would like to help me out anymore, even though just watching these videos is always great, and I do appreciate it, you could check out my Patreon. It's linked below in the description of this video and all the other ones. There's a whole bunch of other ones from just helping out, which I really appreciate, from $1 all the way up, and you get extra stuff like t-shirts, wristbands, online video Q&As and things like that. So again, thank you so much. Please look forward to more reptile content coming from this channel, as well as some other really cool stuff that I'm starting to get into and working with some other really cool creators and educators, both in Colorado and around the country. So, hope everyone's having a great day, and we'll check you next time.